Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Speaking Legally, where the legal meets the cultural. We are here with our two guest hosts, Edward Pichardo Esquire, Royce Russell Esquire, and myself, Dr. Stacey N.C. Grant. We thank you for tuning in. It is our official season 2, second show. It's the third show. I'm losing track. This year is like already flying by, and we're witnessing stuff that I think is affecting all of our mental health. But we're here to help you understand the law, to understand what's going on. We have two experts that help you to unpack what we see, be empowered with information, and hopefully inspiring you to do your part to help our community. So let's hear from our two expert attorneys. We'll start with Señor Edward Pichardo Esquire.
Hola, ¿cómo estás? Buenas tardes, todo el mundo. Welcome to our show today, Speaking Legally, where the legal meets the cultural. Once again, welcome. I really believe you're going to find today's program and discussion extremely interesting and fulfilling. So welcome once again.
Thank you, Mr. Pichardo. Mr. Royce Russell Esquire, welcome back to the show.
Hey, welcome to everybody. Thank you for having me once again. I'm always impressed that you keep on asking me back. So, the fact that you keep on asking me back must mean that I'm doing something right? So today we are going to expound on some legal terminology and consequences. And we're going to use our critical thinking and our critical listening and reading and discuss how the actions of a few is being described amongst the many in the media.
Yes, indeed. And we want to say welcome to our loyal listeners. Hey, Richard. Hey, Deborah. Appreciate you being here. All those who are tuning in, those who share this broadcast out with others, and for your notes that you send us that you really appreciate that we're ahead of the curve. It's no failure, or I should say accident, that a lot of what we talk about on Speaking Legally happens to show up later on in mainstream media, the way we dissect and look at what's happening around. Unfortunately, we've had more than our fair share in the news, but let's get at it today. It's real time, January 13th. We've witnessed quite a bit, and I think there's some areas that we all need to understand because some of what I'm listening to, it's really strange. Is there the truth and not the truth? Nothing but the truth. What is happening in America?
Well, I can tell you right now, history has brought us just a slew of terminology from the political perspective and from the criminal perspective and the cultural. And hopefully today we'll be able to mix and go in and out of the terminology and what it all means. And so a prime example of that, if I may lead off, is that we keep on hearing this term insurrection. And it's being described as if it is a crime. And my view of the statute doesn't lead me directly to that, but it may be some criminal aspects in that. It more speaks to the power of the president to invoke certain rights, the power of the president to invoke the use of the National Guard or the use of armed forces to protect the nation's interests. But whether there is some federal trespass laws or whether there is some, 10 USC 254 letter E, F, and remember 10 USC 254 is the insurrection clause. So you feel free to go up and down and read sideways in it. If there is some language in it that leads to criminality and a greater scope, we'll know that, we'll hear that. But what I think is more important is, what does it mean at the end of the day? And so I'm going to use this time not to just isolate and talk about insurrection, even though that is what we're talking about, the actions and the rioting, but to give a real sense of what does that mean at the end of the day. And what it means at the end of the day is quite different than what one would think if you're charged with a state crime. If you're charged with a federal crime, you are bound by the federal sentencing guidelines. And let me just hold something up here. Let's see, for the world to see. I'll hold it there for a second or two. It's called the Federal Sentencing Laws and Practices. That is what you're facing when you commit a federal crime. It is not one of those actions that you can take and you can automatically say, oh, I'm going to get 5 years, or they're just going to give me a fine. Oh, I'm going to do 1 year because it's a misdemeanor. The way the federal sentencing guideline works is that it takes your whole body of work. So if you were stealing chips when you were 14 and 15, and you did a robbery when you were 29, 30, 40, and then you decided that you're going to participate in the insurrection and the rioting and the taking over of a federal property and trespassing, and you're lucky enough that they don't charge you with a felony because there were people that died aiding and abetting, things of that nature, the mountain is still very steep as to what you could be sentenced to. There is no mandatory minimum. And let me just explain what a mandatory minimum is. There are certain federal crimes that if you commit them, by law, you have to be sentenced to that number. For instance, if you possess a gun, if you discharge a gun, that falls under the federal statute of 924, 924C, 924C, 922G, 924A. And within that statute, there is a mandatory sentence that the court has to give, which is 60 months, 5 years. No ifs, ands, and buts about it. That's even if you're a grade A1 citizen, never have anything in your background. If you have something in your background, it could only go up. So your baseline is 60 months. So in the charges that the rioters will face, it is my analysis that there isn't any mandatory minimum. But there are maximums. Maximum 10 years, 20 years, 15 years, 5 years. So for those who participated, they have to understand that their future is still very, very gray. Because once again, if you have a past, your past can catch up to you, because the federal statutes read as the following. You have the crime, which equates to an offense level, which equates to the amount of time that you may be facing. That time that you may be facing is then adjusted based upon your criminal history. If you have 1 arrest in your past, then your criminal history category 1. If you have 2, 3, 4 arrests in your past, then you are category 3 or category 2. And as you move in those categories, guess what? The length of sentencing goes up, your exposure goes up, and with the sentencing guidelines for which judges have to at least listen to, it's not mandatory, listen to, you could be facing a number of years or months in jail. There's no guarantee that a court is going to look at this as just a slap on the wrist, especially since someone died.
And I like to, just compliment that by saying that with respect to the riot statute, 18 USC 2101, the 5-year prison sentence there is a maximum, not a mandatory minimum, as
Correct.
Royce was discussing. So what happens there is that if whoever gets convicted under that federal statute, the judge that would be sentencing that individual would have some discretion to decide whether to sentence that individual to that maximum or to something below that. I would imagine that defense lawyer would, talk about that person's background, whether they've ever committed an offense previously of this nature, and things of that sort. With respect to the insurrection statutes, I agree with Royce. There are a number of them ranging from 10 USC, I believe 252 down to about 254, 55. There are a number of paragraphs. And the reason for that is because it deals with the president having the ability to establish law and order. There may be circumstances where there are riots or insurrections taking place in a particular state. And normally what happens under those circumstances is that a governor of that state will say, hey, listen, things are out of order here. I need to be able to use the militia to quell that order. And the president would say, okay, militia, go ahead, because you're basically talking about the U.S. military, which is under federal jurisdiction. But in the event that governor is not doing that, and that would often happen in places like in the South during the civil rights era, where you would have some sort of local disturbance by white supremacists. And of course, the local governor didn't want federal troops to come down there and protect the black citizens that might be desegregating a school, for instance, like what happened in Little Rock, Arkansas, and invoke that act to be able to get militia down there. That was, used. I think Lyndon Johnson had to use it. John F. Kennedy, so, that's why you have those different paragraphs in the Insurrection Act. And I believe that was enacted in 1807 prior to the Civil War. I mean, but you're absolutely right. I mean, you mentioned right before this discussion, this whole issue about how things are being characterized, what the follow-up is. We talked about that last show. We had all of this stuff going on while we were on the show. We were watching it on the screen and we're like, oh my God, but the big deal, the real deal is what's going to happen next. Now, in the last couple of days, we've been hearing about people getting arrested, people taken into custody, people being detained, people being fired from their jobs. But they seem to be kind of glossing over exactly what the charges is. I'm hearing stuff like trespass. Some people were actually caught in the act of engaging in actual violence. Some people were actually caught in the act of destroying property.
There were definitely assaults against police officers. You saw it on film. You saw them swinging. You saw them fighting.
You had one officer who died after getting hit by a fire extinguisher.
That's right. And there was no distinction between, and we could discuss this later on. There was no distinction between officers that were sympathizers and officers that were actually doing their duty.
Well, I'm going to say this. I read either yesterday or the day before. They seem to be starting to close in on officers who ranged from aiding and abetting to sympathizing to just engaging in inappropriate behavior. Because and some of them are, from what I understand, some of them have been suspended. I think one or two have actually been. I mean, there's a lot going on here. I mean, I'm they're also looking at members of Congress, okay, who may have aided and abetted, allowed explicit entry. This is it's amazing the scope of behavior that is starting to be revealed here. You called it, Royce. I got to give you the props, my brother, because you said, they, some of the law enforcement, some of them folks, and this is an inside job, and it appears to definitely have been. I mean, there's no question that something this large could have been pulled off. The chief of the Capitol Police has since resigned. You also have other layers of the law enforcement leadership related to security of the Capitol resigning. I believe Soon has had a reason to give interview to a major outlet, and he seems to, because the finger pointing has started now. No, it's you. It was you. No, you did it.
Dr. Grant, Dr. Grant, I know you want to say something.
Yeah, because before we get there, I want to go back there, so push a pin in that.
Okay.
But let's roll it back a little bit. Mr. Russell just went through this whole thing about insurrection and what it is, and you started expanding upon what's in all these articles. For the average person who doesn't know Article S to Z to V to B, something was done. And I was listening to defense attorneys on CNN who are defending the American who took the podium and was smiling and cheesing with the podium. And we all know that everyone has a constitutional right to a defense, but his defense attorneys were using some of the terminology I just heard you say about the backstory. Who is he as a person? Has he had previous convictions or challenges? And then we come to find out that he's married to a physician, has 5 kids, and I don't know what his standing in the community, but they're
allegedly, all this is
allegedly.
We in the media, all this is allegedly, right? Make sure I got to practice my lawyer skills. Can't have you out here, allegedly, right?
Allegedly.
Right.
And I'm listening to them talk about their defense for him, and I find it quite interesting. So before we get into everything else you were just bringing up, will it be a lot of smoke and mirrors? Would all of these arrests just be for sake of saying that there was some sort of consequence to this behavior, or will people get off?
Well, let me jump into that. And while I'm speaking on this, if you can, because I know you're the fabulous for multitasking and producing and on air co-host and all that. If you look up United States sentencing guidelines, and while I'm expounding on what you're talking about, if that comes up, just show it on the screen. I think the answer to your question is that the people that are in custody that have been charged will see their day in court. What you witnessed by defense counsel going on what I call the offense by talking about their client's background and who that person is, I would say to a certain degree is foolish, and I would not have done that. The reason why it's foolish is that, one, you're not really setting up a defense because there's nothing that you could defend. It's what we call stubborn evidence. It won't change, can't change, will not change. It's a video. We got you. That's number one. So if you're not speaking to the video itself, like that's not him, look, my client was in Alabama when this was going on, then you need not take the podium because your mitigating factors, which you think was heard across the world, is of no moment. Because in the federal world, when you are charged and when you plead guilty, because these people will plead guilty, they're not taking this to trial. They will plead guilty. And it comes time to be sentenced. You will have a probation officer that would interview you and go through your whole background. Anything that's mitigating will come up. Anything that's not will show just the same. Not only that, the defense attorney will have an opportunity to then write what we call a sentencing memorandum on your behalf to try to convince the judge that you shouldn't be sentenced to the maximum of the 5 years. You shouldn't even be sentenced to the range that you may fall into in your criminal history, your past criminal history, because a lot of people think like, hey, look, these are good people. They're misguided by politics, or they just have a good faith in what they believe in. They believe in, a world that is different than the Democrats or different than the left or the right wing. They're fighting. But these people have passed, and their past may cause them to be put in a situation that they could never, ever think of. You know how many clients I represent who have criminal history, and they think like, oh, why are they bringing that up? That happened 7 years ago. Oh, I didn't know that misdemeanor was going to affect me. I did my time. But in federal court, it all comes up. So once again, I want to reiterate, because it is important that anybody is listening to Speaking Legally that was up on the podium running the steps and got caught, first thing they need to do is find out what their exposure is. And the only way you can do that is look at your federal base level for the crime, to look at what your criminal history was in the past to determine what category you're going to be in. And the categories go from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1 arrest, category 1, 2 arrests, or 3 arrests, category 2, category 3 is 4, 5, 6, Category 4, 789. And for every time you move a category, the exposure goes up. This is not going to be a day where you go to criminal court in the county that you live in and they go, oh yeah, I know Mr. Russell. Yeah, he just made a mistake that day. We're going to look the other way. Whoever traveled from Alabama and Wisconsin, you're going to have to take the ride back and see a federal judge.
I believe there's a question that's been posed twice. What is a militia? Now my best understanding of what a militia is, it's basically a military unit that's made from members of the citizenry. So basically what it is basically what you call a National Guard, Army Reserve. You have people who were former military, now no longer military. I believe that on a monthly or semi-monthly basis, they engage in some level of training, and they, part of this group, and they are invoked in times of need, say, ranging from a protest to some sort of natural disaster. It's basically a citizens army, if you will. It's a militia. The reason why you have those types of distinctions is really because at the end of the day, the framers of the Constitution, and in most countries, you have to be careful on the use of the military, because the contemplation of the duty of the military is to defend the country, right? Mostly from some foreign threat, but sometimes you have internal domestic threats. And that's when, these militias come in. So that's like the best explanation that I have for what exactly is a militia. And it's an interesting topic sometimes that comes up, especially with respect to the right to bear arms. Because, the arguments are that originally when the framers allowed for the right to bear arms, it was more so for this issue of you being able to support a militia, a citizens army that could be gathered in a hurry in the event that there's some sort of invasion or some sort of unrest has to be quelled, not to the level where people are now saying, oh, I have just like this individual right to bear arm with no responsibility attached to anything other than my own personal safety. So it is an interesting topic. Great question. Maybe we can do some research and expand upon that. But great question. I do want to add something though here. And going back to what we were talking about a little earlier, I think a lot of this has to do with characterization. You had some media outlets calling these people protesters.
Right.
You had some media outlets calling these people insurrectionists, right? Somebody that's basically trying to overthrow the government, because at the time that this occurred, you had Congress trying to certify the results of the election in order to make a declaration according to the Constitution from the Congress that President-elect Biden was duly elected, and here are the certification of the election results. And that was interrupted by this. That was interrupted by this. Let's keep this in mind. They were in that process, and all of a sudden, Speaker Pelosi in the House had to be rushed out. Pence had to be rushed out of the room. I believe he was over on the Senate side. I mean, this was just simply amazing. And so you had that interruption. So you have the term insurrectionist being used. You got people who were calling them rioters, right? You had some media outlets going as far as using the terms terrorists and murderers. Terrorists because these people were engaging in violent acts with the purpose of trying to achieve a political outcome, which is what terrorists do. They set off a bomb, they kill people, they kidnap because they have some sort of political objective that they're trying to achieve. And so outside of protests, I don't want to call these people protesters at all.
Well, I don't think the word I think the word protest was a word that they used in the beginning, right? When it was actually happening and the crowd was forming. Then as it became more of a stormtroop environment, then it went to rioters. Then what happened is the media became sophisticated and started using insurrection to tie it to the political, like you just did, to the political appetite and reality of what was going on. I would say all of these terms are appropriate and fit different socioeconomic class of people that were involved. Like, I can't help but to replay in my brain how some media try to describe this as, and I'll use this term, we know it and we're truth tellers, so let's be truth tellers, poor white trash, as if this was that type of event, right? Where, those that were on the lowest of the socioeconomic scale and that are uneducated and are desperate are the ones leading the forefront. We can dismay that, right? As Dr. Grant has just provided information, and we know this to be true, that they were very, very intelligent people of economic means that were part of this group, part of the rioters, terrorists, insurrectors, whatever you want to call it, they were part of this group. So depending upon what channel you turn to, terminology is being used and is being associated, in my critical view, with the social economics, and sometimes is used to dilute the reaction and dilute the action of what took place. And we shouldn't allow it. And a perfect example of this, because this is where the cultural and the legal meets, is when the media describes, well, the police would have acted differently had this been a Black Lives protest, versus how the police allowed this momentum to happen until it reached a level of violence before they intervened when it came to the insurrectors or the rioters or the protesters. And what hits a bad nerve, almost like a sciatica nerve in the back, is the describing of, if this was a Black Lives Matters protest, the police would have done A. They would have made sure that it didn't get that far. They would have treated people excessively. Excessive force would have been used. Anything that was negative would have happened. And I believe that statement is true. What my bone is that, why don't we call it what it is? It's not, if this was a Black Lives Matter protest. This is a protest by Black folks that were made up of mostly Black folks, made up of majority Black folks. Black folks would have gotten treated differently. Black folks would have saw their face on the ground. Black folks would have been handcuffed and they would have been bleeding. There would not have been any sympathizers.
And I just want to add something here, and I want to expand upon something I said a little earlier. The question was what is a militia? I kind of explained it from an establishment constitutional perspective. In its pure meaning, it's basically an armed group, because you also have what they call these right-wing militias. You got these white supremacists who get together in numbers, they arm themselves, and they act. And that grouping is also referred to as a militia, because these people are acting with a military purpose, even though they aren't formal members of the military. And the reason why I mention that is because there were different stripes amongst the grouping of peoples that were involved in this that day. You had like these folks who were, I mean, you had some women in there who, when you would look at them, you would say, oh, that's somebody's soccer mom or somebody's grandmother.
Well, they were packing
out there. Well, yeah, I'm going to get to that. I'm going to get to that, brother. Trust me. You had people like that. And then you had people with full military gear, right. The whole deal going on,
black makeup on their face,
exactly, strapped.
That's right.
They are saying were prepared to execute and or kidnap members of Congress because they had some more grandiose plan. You had former members of the military. The one woman who got shot climbing in through some sort of window, she was, I believe, former Air Force trained. They haven't really, I don't know if they've spoken about whether or not she was armed at the time that this occurred. You had individuals chasing down officers in a violent manner. You had, I mean, the range of people that were out there, from the sophisticated, moneyed son of a judge here in New York, recently arrested, socioeconomic background, right? And you had, people who, God knows they probably don't have a pot to piss in. And the problem is with this narrative is they're trying to like label all these people as people who just were blindly following a pack of lies and got caught up in this and don't know how they got caught up in it. Last night, I saw a Frontline special on Alex Jones from InfoWars. He's a right-wing guy who's a lot like Rush Limbaugh, but even more dangerous, who explicitly puts out lies. And one of the biggest lies he put out was that Hillary Clinton was running some sort of child sex trafficking ring, and that it was taking place in the basement of this pizza restaurant in DC. And this guy believed this, actually went armed to this place, busted a couple of shots in the spot, went down to look for this basement, and then all of a sudden realized there's no basement. There's nothing. You know what I mean? What you were told was just not correct. And the reason for this piece, I think, on PBS was that, it's part of this narrative that, okay, these people are being lied to and they're acting based upon these lies. But my thing is that you got some sophisticated actors here who know it's a lie, but they still have certain racist, supremacist beliefs that they insist on pursuing. You have individuals who have to be responsible for the information that they take in, no matter what. Because if somebody tells me that, look, it's okay for you to rob that store, and I believe them, and I go in there and I rob that store, and I get caught and I get arrested, you best believe that is not going to be a defense that I'm going to be able to try to use in a court of law. I'm going to be looked upon as like, oh, really? So wait up, who told you that it was okay to go in there and take the money out of the register? Oh, I was listening to this show on the internet, and this guy looked like he was telling the truth.
We know, and we know that.
I mean, really,
showboating in the media and real defense is not going to work. But we also know that justice is scaled, and so it's going to be scaled in these cases. It's going to be scaled in a favor most likely to not harm those that offend because of the racial dynamics of America. Yeah, and absolutely. They can call them whatever they want to call them. What I want them to do, and this is part of the problem of where we are today, is that people have a problem of saying white, of saying black, and calling it what it is. If this was a black protest, not a protest about Black Lives Matter, because that dilutes the racial dynamic and the action and reaction that we know from being black men walking down the street in whatever city we are. Don't describe it. Yes, it is true. Yes, if this was a protest for Black Lives Matter, yes, it would have been treated differently. But that's surface. And in cardiac arrest, and Royce Russell don't believe in surface. Let's go down a little bit. If this was a protest with black people, majority black people, we know that things will be different. And it's not enough for people to think it. I need all the speaking heads that are on CNN, that's on ABC, to say that. Don't describe it as Black Lives Matter.
And don't compare it to Black Lives Matter. That it's totally separate. Like, that is advocating for injustice. This was trying to take over the country. Like, the two should not even be in the same sentence. We should not be evaluating that. I mean, should we go back to the sister that was shot just driving up with her kids in the car? One person,
right?
Wasn't an army of people coming? Come on now, like
exactly. So I agree with you, and I think we're on the same page. Use the terminology that's appropriate. Use the terminology that is appropriate. If this was a protest run, designed, had majority of black folks, whatever it was, I don't care if it was raising for new uniforms for the Washington Wizards. You seen their uniforms lately? Pretty bad. You understand what I'm saying? There would have been an issue. I bring levity to it because I think levity is needed sometimes. There is an issue, and to make the point, and that's the point that our kids need to hear. That's the point that the world needs to hear. That's the point that we need to recognize. There's no sympathizers when it comes down to excessive force to black people. I ain't seen one sympathizer yet. There's nobody that intervenes. There's nothing. You just get what is handed to you. And we see, and in this, you know what, history is so great and events are so great. I'll take another point and once again, I'm on the cultural mission right today. Let's take this point of sympathizers. If you believe that there are political sympathizers that were in law enforcement that allowed certain things to go on, why is it so hard for you to swallow that there are racist and prejudiced people that wear that same uniform that will beat on people that are of brown and black color, and there's others that will sit by and let it go by and nothing happened? No discipline, no retraining, no termination, nothing. See, we could jump up and say, oh, they were sympathizing. Yeah, well, let's take that a step further.
No, and listen, absolutely. I mean, right now, the situation that we have is that we have, and this is one of the things that I want to bring out. Right before all this happened, during the presidential election, you had, for instance, here in New York City, the Police Benevolent Association endorsing Trump. You had a number of law enforcement unions endorsing Trump.
One got suspended because he was on his microphone endorsing Trump using the police radio microphone. Remember,
you had in fact, you had a law enforcement officer during this wearing a Trump hat, and somebody was trying to give an explanation that he was trying to calm stuff down. Inappropriate. You're in uniform. You're not supposed to be. I mean, come on, really?
Well, one of them said today, I don't know if you caught it, that the police, where all of you that want to defund the police when the police had to come in here and protect. I'm like, what? I feel like I'm living in an alternate universe.
Once again, that 3-card Monty, they're going to flip it around. And you know what's amazing? I've seen a lot of people get suspended. A lot of people get terminated. Meanwhile, we have stuff on film. George Floyd, knee on neck. We got to debate this. You know, young brother walking down the street, reaching his pocket to take out some change. Oh, it could have been a gun. You don't know. Like, come on, for real. What are we doing here? What are we saying here?
Listen, they did a forensic analysis of the disproportionate response against protesters who were protesting police brutality this summer and how they were treated, mostly black, mainly black, versus how these protesters were treated. They looked at the number of arrests. They looked at and compared the videos of officers, peaceful protesters not doing anything, being hit with batons, pepper spray, rubber bullets, not doing anything nowhere near what these insurrectionists, these terrorists did at the Capitol last week.
Let me just interrupt our programming to announce that they've officially voted in the House that President Trump is impeached.
Not surprising. Not surprising. I mean, with respect to that, and so what some of the audience needs to understand, and I was talking through this with somebody, my understanding is that Warnock and Ossoff have not been sworn in yet in the Senate. So the Senate is still under the control of the Republicans. And
so they're not going to happen.
So in terms of a conviction in the Senate, that is unlikely to happen. Now, there have been news in the media earlier today that McConnell is considering bringing back the senators to actually consider convicting, because his excuse is that constitutionally he's only mandated, I think, after the 19th to reconvene the Senate, and by that time, President-elect Biden will have been sworn in and Trump will be out.
Well, and look, we don't have to really buy into the big conspiracy theory. We could buy in a little conspiracy theory, which we know, like, this is all, should I use the word foreplay? That's all this is. There's nothing really going to happen. It's a good show. I haven't seen the Democrats flex their muscles in a very long time, and I've been on this earth for a very long time. And this fake the funk, pump fake, kind of like going to flex but not really flex is what we see, and what has annoyed many people that are or call themselves Democrats, because it's this fake flexing, knowing what the end result is. And meanwhile, Republicans, when they flex, and so this is no different than what we have seen in the past. So now we have the impeachment. So he's the first president that has been impeached twice. We know that the processes for anything to happen, he will be out of office. The idea of using the 25th Amendment to pardon him will call for him having to resign, which good luck with that, because that means defeat, right? And he's never going to be defeated. So all this is, mental masturbation. You know what I mean? It ain't really going nowhere.
Well, let's talk about that, okay? So the Democrats, and particularly those in the House and those in the Senate as well, were asking Vice President Pence to invoke the 25th Amendment. Now, what is the 25th Amendment? The 25th Amendment overall deals with the president's inability to be able to carry out the duties of the office.
That's right. He's unfit.
Yeah. So when you look at the 25th Amendment, I just want the audience to understand the 25th Amendment has different parts to it. Okay. The 25th Amendment basically allows is invoked in instances, like I said, unfit or unable. So let's say the president under the good circumstances, let's say the president has to undergo an operation, and there's going to be basically 3 hours where he's going to be sedated or unconscious, right? The 25th Amendment is used to allow the vice president to act as the president in his stay until the president awakens again, is able to carry out the duties, and then the power goes back to the president. But under the circumstances that we're talking about here, they were asking Pence to invoke the 25th Amendment, which would basically entail him issuing a declaration, a proclamation that the president is unable and unfit to carry out his duties based on the incident that occurred. But now, then
stop right there.
But if I may,
stop right there. Come on, man. Now, yes, that is the definition, but we're going to put the metal to the pedal.
All right.
If somebody proposed that,
to
Trump, because Trump would have to sign on to this, because everybody.
No. That's what I was getting to.
No. Trump will have to. No, I'm not faking the funk.
Okay.
Trump will have to sign off on this, bro, because everybody is scared of him.
Well,
They're
from
not
that perspective,
making any moves, right? I know what the law says. The law says the vice president can do that. We know what the law says, and we know what happens at the Nets game on a Friday night before we enact the law.
But
right?
It's not just the vice president alone. You agree?
I understand that.
Okay.
But he doesn't have his hand in his pocket with only the vice president. He got his hand in his pocket with the damn near all the senators. They never make a move.
Well, what I'm actually referring to is that the vice president alone couldn't make that decision. What happens is that he then needs a majority of the president's cabinet, which is about 15, like all those secretaries, including.
And this is what I'm saying. He has his hand in. I think he has his hand in Pence's pocket, where he's paralyzed.
In his back, like a
right. He's paralyzed.
Or he has his hands on the string.
And he's been firing cabinet members left and right. Nobody, look, everybody that resigned from the cabinet that was holding posts, they all resigned when their back was totally against the wall. Oh, snap, the government is taking over. All right, Department of Homeland Security, I resign.
Well, Well, let's
No
talk
shit.
about
You
that. Let's
resigned
talk about
today?
that. Let's
You
talk
know,
about that.
wait a beat. That's like the cops all around your house, got the gun, got your kid, got everything. Yo, Mr. Russell, you need to come on out. I think it's done data. And I go, yeah, you know what? You got me. Like, no shit, we got you. Like, so, I mean, I'm just putting the spin. I understand the definition, and the audience, you know, thank you for giving it to them, and I'm sure they appreciate it. And this is no slight on you, but I just got to put it in there. Like, come on, man, this is, I mean, it's all hokey pokey. It's like the judge knowing what he's going to do before you and I walk in the courtroom.
Let's fully develop this, because they were asking him first. They were asking President Trump to resign. They said, "Why don't you resign? You know, what are you doing here?" He says no, right? Then they were asking Pence, "Look, invoke the 25th, talk to the other members of the cabinet, see if you get support from the majority of them to declare him unfit."
And you know what he said? You know what he said? You didn't hear what he said. You didn't hear what he said. They caught him on the microphone. He had his microphone off. And he thought his microphone was off, and it was on. He said, "What you talking about, Willis?" That's what he said. He said, "What you talking about, Willis?" You see, you didn't hear that. You didn't hear that. I got that piece. Right? I got that piece. Go ahead, continue.
So then what ends up happening is that at some point after this proclamation and the vice president takes over, the president gets to say, "No, I am not unfit. I am able to carry out the duties of my office." Check this out. Then at that point, that proclamation, that declaration gets transported over to the Congress.
Right.
And the only way at that point to remove the president from office is by 2/3 vote in each of those bodies, in both the Senate and the House of Representatives, which is a higher burden than for impeachment, because for impeachment, all you need is a majority in the House, but you still need a 2/3 in the Senate. So I just kind of want folks to understand all of those dynamics. I think that what's actually happened here, and I don't begrudge the House of Representatives for impeaching him again. You know why? Because not only is it history making, but it then puts the ball in the Senate's court. If these Republicans want to continue to stand by him,
come on, man.
Here you go.
Yeah, come on, Ed. Look, it's not hurting them. They don't give a flying F.
Hey, but you know what? They're going to have to live with the decision of their leader not to move to convict this man.
I wish
on his actions.
And maybe I have it wrong. Maybe I have
all of this has.
No. All I'm saying is maybe. Look, I practice in criminal law. I've done that a lot in civil rights, false arrest. I'm not, a lobbyist. You were. So you up in Albany, so I deference to you. But I'm going to tell you, it's a big difference between the guy from the project who goes to jail and ain't got a pot to piss in before he leaves, and ain't got a pot to piss in when he get out, as opposed to the guy who goes to jail, who has money, know his money's secured, and when he get out, know his money going to be here. And when I think of the Republicans and I think of the Senate, they're the people that are going to jail, knowing that their money's here, and knowing that their money's going to be there when they get out. So they have a different allegiance and a position as to, what my legacy is or what my legacy isn't. Because if they did, they would have been acting differently a long time ago.
Well, Royce, what I'm going to say is this. Many of these people, and I'm talking about these electeds and these folks in the game, they're historians, okay? The last time this drama went down with Nixon in 1974, there were 3 choices that Nixon had. Either you resign, either you fight impeachment and then conviction in the Senate, or you go ahead and resign like he did, and then and then get that pardon, which is what occurred. He resigned. Gerald Ford
gave him that pardon.
Gave him an unconditional pardon because he was facing prosecutions. 3 of his cohorts were being prosecuted, and there was movement and contemplation about then going ahead and prosecuting him. And that deal was cut. Most people argue that deal was cut even beforehand, because right after he resigned, the Congress said, okay, so we're not going to move to impeach, since you're going ahead and resigning. And this is something actually that affected the Republicans for the years after that, because Gerald Ford was not elected. He ran for office and he wasn't elected. And most people say it was because of the pardon. You know, the Republicans suffered bad defeats in both houses after that. So in terms of political selfishness and people looking at their self-interest, I think what the Democrats in the House are doing is they're setting it up, because they already have both houses now, right? When once Warnock and Ossoff get sworn in, they want to try to solidify that by saying, see, this is what's going on, country. Listen, you got to stop supporting this Republican Party. Look at what they're doing. Okay, I think that's what the purpose is behind going ahead and going through these machinations and achieving this impeachment. Because now what they're going to do is they're going to take those articles, they're going to put them in an envelope, and they're going to say, "Here, Senate, let's see what you're going to do. Either you're just going to sit on this and wait, and this is going to just sit there in infamy, or you're going to go ahead and convene and have a trial."
They got to do what they got to do. But to me, the Democrats remind me of a bulldog. When you look at a bulldog, you're like, yo, I'm not even going near that. Like that bulldog, they just look at you, right? And they slow. They just want to eat. You love them to death. You love them to death. You cuddle them to death. They don't move fast. But if you get ready to break into the house and you saw that's the first thing you saw, you're like, yo, wait a minute. I don't know if this is one of the bulldogs that is cool or not. All of these things are being done, as you said, to set up something.
Well, listen, brother, I'm gonna tell you a story. I'm gonna tell you a story from back in the day. One of my guys decided to try to run past this big dog, a Saint Bernard. He was moving slow to get in through a hole in the fence into the handball court, and he thought he was gonna make it. That dog, who looked so slow, moved so fast and bit that brother on his leg that it was like completely unbelievable. So all I'm going to say in defense of the Democratic Party right now, brother, is just wait and see. I think, I think what's happening here is interesting. I mean, they were able to get the Senate. They have the House. They have the White House. Let's see what happens and what they do. I, in particular, support this move for impeachment, despite its apparent lack of utility or purpose in the end. I think it's important.
Well, you got to do. You have to do what you have to do, and so there's no two ways about it. And I'm not. My position is that I don't support it. My position is I do support it, but support only goes but so far, right? I mean, like, you support your kids to go to school, but you want results. You want A's and B's. That's what I'm saying.
As we come to the top of the hour, there's still quite a bit unfolding. And I think one of the areas that we don't want it lost, that this also prevents his pension if it were to pass in the Senate, correct? Or is it now that his pension and protection and all those things he would lose as a result of being impeached in both the Senate and the House? Or is it just one? Just as we close out and just give some context, because that's been thrown out there too, that it's more than just ceremonial, that this is taking a statement because the world is watching. Because if this happened in another country, we'd be the first to poke our nose in and give commentary.
But we're always hypocritical. When I say we, America is always hypocritical. And I tell you, the next debate is going to be, and to your question, there was already conversation about him having national security credentials upon his retirement, and him having security upon his retirement, or his leave of office. That was already something that was at issue, right? This is more to say that he shouldn't have it, but I always sleep with one eye open, folks. I'm going to say folks because I'm not going to use another term. Folks are going to look out for folks. And you might hear commentary that goes a little something like this. America is not beholden to one actor, We can see through the flaws. It's been tradition. It's this, that, and the other. Something that lays the carpet that says, we're going to not strip him of everything. He going to walk away with a little bit of something. A little bit of something.
I think what you're possibly referring to, and I'm not sure if the simple act of impeachment is going to reduce post-presidential benefits. I'd have to do more research on that. I know for Nixon, upon resignation, I think he ended up having to negotiate a reduced salary. I believe he was supposed to get, if he was like a president that hadn't gotten impeached and so forth, he was, I think the salary was around $800,000. It had to go down to about $200,000 in a reduced level of security. That's an interesting question. I'd have to look into that.
Well,
if
we know
the simple
issue,
impeachment
we know the
triggers
whole
that
issue of
reduction.
national security was something that was brought up even before, right? We know that there was conversation that related around, could we trust him with national security, given his ability to tweet, his inability to not control himself. So, I mean, the stakes are higher. The
5,
stakes are
4,
higher.
3, 2, 1.
And there we go. The stakes are higher.
Oh,
and
boy.
So, that's always going to be a question. But I'm just saying, folks, and we know what folks mean, they're going to make sure that folks getting taken care of.
Well, the story continues to unfold, and clearly there's a lot more that we didn't get to today that's happening in real time, because this is going to dominate the airwaves until the inauguration. So thank you for tuning in. Hi, Sam. Thank you, Monica. We appreciate you, Richard, Deborah, everyone that's watching live, everyone that's catching the replay, everyone that's sharing it out. We're watching this all unfold, and I continue to say I pray for everyone's sanity, safety, and peace, because, we're still dealing with a global pandemic. That hasn't gone away. We have issues upon issues with getting the vaccination, not getting the vaccination, how that's being distributed. We still have all sorts of financial issues. There's a lot going on. I read a meme. Somebody said that 2021 is 2020 with a wig on. So I'm not quite sure what it is.
I don't know what that means. What does that mean, though? What does that mean?
Just dressed up, looking different, but some of the same trauma that we experienced. That's
right. My critical hat wasn't on. I do believe in that. I believe that the relationship between folks of color and law enforcement is going to continue. There may be a heightened awareness in the media to call a spade, and that may help us in the legal field be able to resolve some of these matters. I think the politics that we have witnessed is only going to be inflamed more. Some water is going to be doused on it during the next 4 years, but the comeback, don't call it a comeback. Something's going to happen, because LL Cool J is not gone. He's live and present. So yeah, we need to keep our head on a swivel and keep our boxing gloves on every day.
Well, speaking of issues following us into 2021, I think it's a fitting time to mention that there was some recent news on the George Floyd matter. The main officer in that case who was charged with his death, Derek Chauvin, is supposed to receive a separate trial from the other 3 defendants in the case based on a COVID infection. So basically what that means is that because these individuals share common charges, common evidence that is being levied against them or presented against them, in order to efficiently use the court's resources under normal circumstances, you would have all of these individuals tried at the same time in the same courtroom. You would have their defense attorneys sitting next to them, one judge. Each one of those lawyers would get to cross-examine the particular witness testifying against them, if there is a witness, depending on the evidence that's being presented. So, I guess I'll let you give your take on it.
in it.
We're gonna have to push a pin on it because it's 5 o'clock.
Oh,
You suck it
right.
on the air out of the balloon. So we're
all
gonna
right.
say goodbye to everybody. That's my man, Impeached Charter. I love him to death. He gets paid by the word. You know what I mean? So make sure you understand your consultation fee when you come by the crib. Excuse me, come by the office. Abogado and mucho dinero all day, every day. A man of the people.
No, mucho trabajo y poco dinero.
There you go. Exactly what I said. Exactly. But no.
But I want to thank Sonia. Thank
Yes.
you, Sonia, for tuning in. I saw you in there too. So we really appreciate all of you. And thank you for letting us know that the discussion is helpful, enlightening. Hopefully it helps you look through and unpack all of this with a little bit of levity on serious topics, but really how it impacts our community and things that we need to know. So thank you for tuning in. We'll be back again next week post this whole inaugurate. You know what? I'm not even going to say anything. I'm just going to keep praying for sanity. That's what I'm going to do. But thank you both. Buenas tardes. Abogado Richardo and attorney Royce Russell.
That's right. My brother Ed. See you on the other side.
Adios.